Hey, welcome to Alchemy of Housing Justice, the podcast where we explore the collective magic we need to reimagine our housing future. It's me, Sarah Hunter, your host for this little ditty, and I'm all up in my feels, y'all. Like in a good way. The kind of feels that make me glad to be alive and experiencing all this love and joy.
Each episode catches me in a particular moment of reflection, and I think this one is sort of in a moment of the power in our relationships with one another and to one another, the power of intimacy and vulnerability, and all the ways that we as humans are constantly moving through trust and experience with one another. And sometimes that feels really good, and sometimes it feels raw or can make us feel raw. And we're all moving through this all the time, each of us as humans. And I'm just experiencing what a blessing it is to have people around us that care deeply, either for us as other humans or for me as another human, or even that care deeply about a common vision for the future that we want to see. Today, we're sort of doing something a little different. So, we're going to call this a bonus episode. Over the first couple of episodes that we've had in this podcast, you've heard us thank the team of folks who sort of helped move these podcast episodes out of a little idea and into a set of conversations made for your listening ears and your listening hearts. Part of the magic of this podcast and my great joy in doing this is that I get to make this happen and this magic happen alongside people I adore. And the producer of this podcast is someone I feel like I have bonded with across multiple lives. So today, we're going to have a special conversation between us so you can share in this joy and magic with us. Here we are. And I want to introduce you to author, artist, and activist Terrance Walker, also known as Tré Ward, who is the producer of this podcast and also a person I have been able to learn from so deeply over the past several years. One of the most impactful moments of my life was a moment when Terrance said to a room of folks working on national homelessness intervention strategies that he wanted to be able to bring his whole self into the work. And it was in that moment that I realized the myriad of ways that I had been checking parts of myself at the door when I entered the room to do the so-called work. It was like a turning point for me, for like this self-realization. I think that, I don't know, maybe I would even mark it as a pivot point in needing desperately to be in relationship to work and to people I work alongside differently. So first, I want to acknowledge that waking up moment for me, Terrance. But more, or as importantly, I just want to say thank you for your influence and impact, both on the world around you and on me.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's a pleasure to work and learn alongside you. I look forward to diving into this conversation with you.
We've talked a bunch about sort of these ideas of the ways we've had to sort of separate ourselves, and this idea of sort of professionalism or anxiety or burnout. And we've talked in some spaces about how that propels us to show up in certain ways in the work. And I'm curious if you have just thoughts that you want to kick off with that are um about like different ways that you've been able to show up in work, and sort of what your hope is for both this podcast and for sort of building a better future together.
Something that's really important to me is being able to bring my entire self into the work that I do. I realize that like we're not monoliths and we're not just our job descriptions. We are like a body of different experiences. And I think that it really honors the humanity in us when we're able to share them with other humans. And so being able to bring my love for social work as well as my passion for just artistic things is really what I love most about being able to do this podcast and to do it alongside the Housing Justice Collective, who have made such a profound impact on my life and my career. Always open to honoring and creating new ways to like uplift those non-traditional values and skills that we have that are like innate to us, that we typically have to tuck away during 9 to 5, and just finding different ways to bring those to the forefront and really be able to be our whole self, or whenever we choose to.
Yeah, whenever we choose to, which is our choice, right? And then, like, not having to check that at the door, but also being able to set boundaries when we need to too. I think you and I have talked about this a bunch in sort of the early stages of this podcast about what it means to like feel authentic in sort of both our own personal purposes, but in how we contribute to a justice oriented society, or to like getting us toward the future that we want to see. And what I love about being able to do this podcast with you is that, um, from week to week, as we're figuring out episodes or we're producing them, we like always get to show up as the exact selves that we are in that moment, whether that's with a bunch of stuff going on or whether that's like getting straight to the heart or to the meat of what we need to do together. It feels really good to be able to be in that kind of relationship with you. So, I just want to say, like, that's a dance we do all the time, and sort of naming that. And in fact, like, we decided to do this bonus episode together, right? To like share sort of the behind the scenes with our listeners, because we're we're trying to live into these truths in every part of our design, so that the listeners of the podcast can see behind the production, because it changes, like what we think about what's important. It names something that is sort of implicit in our values as a team. Um, and you sort of talked about you're bringing different parts of yourself, like your artistic self and your sort of passion for social justice. Um, that you can bring sort of both parts of that. But so I'm curious about your thoughts on how this idea of whole self is connected to justice and to liberation, or even just to housing justice specifically. What are the connections there that you'd want folks to take from how we're doing this?
As a young queer Black male in a professional space, I'm always kind of taught to code switch and to check the parts of me at the door that don't fit in. And a lot of those pieces may be the very thing that may help someone to like feel seen or appreciated. And that's what I really appreciate about the work that you all have continued to do. Is to really create space for people to show up as their full selves and to find themselves in the process by connecting to other like-minded people, as well as people who are totally different. It's just like finding that human connection outside of what your job description is about. Definitely setting boundaries and honoring them, but realizing that we are human first and foremost. Not everyone has experienced homelessness or houselessness. However, at some point in all of our lives and experience, we have felt helpless, or we felt like we longed for something. So those are just like human experiences. And though you may not have gone through the exact same thing, like those emotional things are what connect us.
So you're talking about feeling like there are spaces that you have to walk into where you're code switching, and or have in the past at least, and that the experience of sort of producing this podcast feels a bit different, because of the ways I think you and I are like trying to figure out how to do this thing going forward from the ground up, right? Like we're we're doing that, like that offers a way, not necessarily to prevent against code switching, but to like feel like, oh, I can bring these parts of myself into this, whether that's the you know the parts for you that are thinking about um uh building toward a career that gets you to integrate like all these parts of yourself, whether it's the music and artistic part, or whether it's this production part, or whether it's like figuring out how to put all these things together, or whether it is actually the like, oh, this experience of this system that I've had is really something that I want to make different. And I hear when you talk about those things, or And I've even seen, as we've sort of been building this together over time, the ways that we, both of us, are like changed and changing because of sort of the things we're learning from just doing this this like little tiny thing, this podcast together. And it reminds me, I guess I wouldn't say the podcast is a really tiny thing, but it feels like a small part of all the other things going on in our lives. And it reminds me of Adrienne Marie Brown's discussion or concept of sort of fractals in the ideas in emergent strategy, that the large is the reflection of the small. And so this is who we are, and this is how we're showing up at the small levels, and thinking about all the ways that that cascades into who we are in different places. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how being in this, how doing this podcast has had an impact for you in some other ways, and that you maybe even haven't named for yourself yet.
I think like something you mentioned before is really just like providing room for people to learn new parts of themselves and what their worth looks like to them. And I think also in the process of that is failing and being stressed out some days. But I think what's beautiful about the relationship that we've created is just the ability to have those transparent conversations and like say, "Man, I'm feeling overwhelmed today. I don't know if I can do it," or "This is hard. I've never done it before. Could you help me figure it out?" Those are some things that have really impacted the bigger picture for me, because I just think that sometimes that I have to have it all figured out, or that I have to figure it out myself, and just to know that there is support, that if I'm able to communicate, that there is help and there are abundant resources that are waiting for me to tap into. And I think this work has really helped to highlight that for me, that there are people in my corner who are willing and able to help, and communication really supports building those relationships.
Yeah, I mean, like white dominant culture sort of demands of us that we show up and know everything, right? And I think the big secret is that we don't. And I mean, I think you'll hear in this podcast over all of the episodes, even the ones we've done previously, and I think the ones in the future, is, you know, none of these ideas that we have are really authentically original. They come from someplace else, and it's that sort of spirit of ancestry and humility that we both are attributing to other people, but also allows us to show up and be like, we're not going to be perfect. We're just going to try to learn from both our own mistakes and our own challenges, and other people's sort of best ideas and their challenges as well, in order to sort of iterate and become the thing we want to be. And I always feel like I get to practice that in real time with you because of who you are as a human, Terrance. And it again, it just feels so great to be able to like be in a production. We're like producing this audio thing for people to hear, and that we get to be in that kind of relationship with each other um feels like it's, it's just turning so many things inside out. Well, I'm curious, are there any other things you wanna bring into this conversation, um, before we sort of bring it to a close?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you again, Sarah, and to all the amazing people at the Housing Justice Collective for always just creating space for people to show up as their whole selves, and find themselves in the process, and just like that mentorship type of relationship. I think those lasting connections are really important, in any of the work that we do, and really just uplifting those non-traditional gifts and skills that people have. Of course, we have our objectives and deliverables, but just realizing that people are individual and unique creatures with their own set of skills and gifts, and they should be not only like accepted but uplifted and celebrated for those things. So that is those are a few nuggets I would like to leave, and thanks again, Sarah.
Yeah. Thank you so much to our producer, Terrance Walker, for your creative influence in this podcast, your technical brilliance, and sharing your magic with me and the world. Thanks to the team of worker owners at the Housing Justice Collective, Josephine, Rivianna, Niki, and Kevin. And we would like to thank Funders for Housing Opportunity and Ann Oliva for encouraging us to experiment in all the ways that might help us move collectively toward transformation. And subscribe to the Alchemy of Housing Justice podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.